Welcome to Test, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by, taking a look at my stuff real quick. So, I was asked to give a shout out. Of course, at the end of all of my videos that feature a Filipino player, I always make sure I say good morning, so it covers the entire Philippines. But for anybody who is coming from Benito Sullivan, Isabela, Philippines, thank you very much for stopping by and watching my stuff. I appreciate the support very much. And also, there is going to come a point where I can't shout people out because I'm probably going to get like dozens of people that are going to ask me to give them a shout out, and it's just going to take up way too much time in the video. So if you get a shout out in the near future, you've kind of gotten in under that type of thing, that bubble. But anyways, I do have Richárd Rapport from Hungary. So let me see. It is hello. And Kusanim. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. And my people from the Philippines, Kamusta, Mabuhay, Maraming Salamat, King Makaibigan for stopping by and taking a look at my stuff. But if you guys are ready, this was a video I mentioned last video that I was going to be showing. It's a very interesting game. So if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look. All right, so we got E4, C5. Knight comes to F3, we got E6, D4, pawn takes D4, knight takes D4, we have knight to F6, knight to C3, knight to C6, bishop to E2, we have queen to C7. So we do have the Sicilian defense, and it is the Taimanov and the Bastrikov variation. As you guys remember me talking about, usually you'll see an A6 just to make sure that we don't have any of these pieces coming to the B5 square, because it can be very annoying. That's not what happened in the game. It can be very annoying, especially if you've placed your queen on C7, because either of these knight moves do kind of like disrupt the queen from its square. So we actually see that in the game. So knight D comes to B5. We see queen to B8. We have F4. We got D6. Bishop comes to E3. We see bishop to E7. We see G4. So Fabiano says, man, you know what? I'm going to just go for it, dude. So we see knight back to D7. We see H4. And Fabiano is basically saying checkmate now. Like, I mean, let's just I don't want to waste any time. He's like, I got things to do. Let's just get checkmate on the board like really quick. So, this is super aggressive, but this is actually the best way to play for white. We see castles by black. We got G5. And yes, the white king is not castled, but it is actually very safe in the current position. And especially, you have to look at, the differences in the position. We'll get to that in a second. But we see A6 trying to knock that knight away. Knight comes to D4. We see queen takes D4, knight takes D4, sorry. And then queen takes D4. And this is the novelty of the game. So, I mean, it's a pretty natural take back. I mean, you can take back with the bishop, but, you do kind of want your bishop to stay where it is and just kind of take back with the queen. Also, it does help you develop. So queen takes D4, we have B5, and then A3. And I just want to talk about the differences between the position. Like, yes, the white king is stuck in the center of the board, but if you just look, I mean, like all of these pieces are really not even really working for black. And I mean, this knight doesn't really have the greatest square to go to. It can't come to F6, can't come to B6. I mean, it can come here, but I mean, B4 would probably just dislodge it and just back it up. So, white is severely ahead in every way, in space, in development, king not being too unsafe, even though it is in the center of the board. So, I mean, it's definitely white for choice. Bishop comes to B7. We see castles by white. Knight goes to C5. We see F5, E5, and then this is the first point in the game that Caruana does kind of give a little bit back. He actually goes queen to D2, and this does actually allow him to get a pawn grabbed. It's actually, we see queen to D2, and then knight takes E4, knight takes E4, bishop takes E4, right? So, white has just lost a pawn. But if we go back after E5, it's actually much better to go queen to B4, because there really isn't a good way to dislodge this queen, because if you do push A5, you're going to be looking at queen takes B5, and this is just like clearly just way better. So you definitely don't want that. So like I said, we did see bishop takes E4, and then we have F6. And this is a nice little in-between move, simply because, I mean, you are going to kind of drop the exchange to go into it. but you're probably going to end up being up a piece. I didn't calculate it. So we actually see bishop back to d8. Now, looking at the position that we see, this is something that the computer wants, and it's just like kind of like an immortal Zug's Wong type of situation. The computer actually is showing rook to c8, and this is just like a really killer, a Zweitschen Zug move. Because you are threatening check here, and you're really gonna have to take with the queen. No, not that. You're gonna have to take with the queen if the rook successfully checks on c2, you're probably gonna go ahead and have to go bishop to d3, and then now bishop takes h1, and rook takes h1, queen comes to b7. So this is just like the relentless attack of white's pieces. And the craziest thing about it is this bishop has been on pre like this entire time. And the major difference that rook to c8 does is it moves with the tempo. Because one of the issues is if you go into this situation like this, you're going to have to move the rook. This pawn capture comes with the tempo. So once you move the rook, you're going to be just losing an entire piece. So that is the main issue with rook sitting on f8. So rook to c8 just perfectly takes care of that all the way. So we see, like I said, f6, bishop comes back to d8. So this allows white basically just completely back into the game. We see pawn takes g7. Rook goes over to e8. Rook h to f1. We see bishop down to b6. We have h5 because, why not push h6 and just basically make like just a super pawn structure. We have rook to c8 now. Bishop comes to d3. And now you see bishop is able to, block in this variation, and you're good. Queen takes d3, or bishop takes d3, queen takes d3, bishop takes e3, queen takes e3. And as you guys can see, you definitely have a lot of threats going on here as white. You really just kind of have your pieces bunched up as black, so it's not the best ever. Queen comes to c7. We see queen to f2. E4. We see c3. Just trying to make sure that we super protect our king. Queen comes to e7. We see queen to f6. And we would definitely like one of these situations to come up because this king is literally stalemated on this square. You do have a lot of threats in the position as white. But after queen to f6, we actually see rook to e8. We're not interested in like helping white in any way. So rook takes d6, and then we see e3. Rook comes to e1. We see e2. We got h6, making sure that we solidify this structure over here. Queen comes to e3 with check, and then we block with rook to d2. We have rook to e6, and then we actually have rook takes e2. And, this is, a really like bad position to be in because you can't really too much move. Because you're going to be like, let's say, for example, you're like, hey, man, let me just move away. You're going to be looking at rook check here, and there really isn't much that you can do to try to, help the situation. If you take back here, you're going to be looking at something like this, and then, this rook is on pre. And so there really aren't any good checks as well to get into the position. So it's looking really, really bad. So the queen actually sacrifices herself on e2. We have rook takes e2, rook takes e2, and, it's really nice looking for white. If white can actually get an attack going, that's going to be kind of crazy. We see queen to c6, rook e to e8. We see king to c2, rook e to c8. We got queen down to f3. Rook comes to a7. We see king to b3. The king is trying to see if maybe it can kind of weasel its way over here to maybe grab a pawn or something. We got rook to e7. We see a4. Rook comes to e6. We have pawn takes b5. Pawn takes b5. Queen comes to b7. Rook e to e8. So that makes us move king to b4 because we definitely don't want to go into this type of situation where we drop our queen. So we got king to b4. We see rook to b8. Queen down to f3. We got rook to e6. We see b3. Rook comes to g6. We see queen to f5. Queen to f4 is maybe slightly more accurate. But you're just going to be moving the rook over here. You're going to be good to go. So like I said, we do see queen to f5. Rook comes to e6. We see queen to d5. Rook comes to g6 again. Queen comes to e5. We see rook g to b6. We see king to a5. And then we actually see b4. Now, if you want to go ahead and pause the video and see what is the best position, the best move for white to make in this position, go ahead and do so. Okay, so there is a move that basically keeps the position the same. And that's the thing about the position. Like, what you really want to do is you want to make sure that you are like basically as white just not changing the position drastically, right? I mean, you have it's one of those situations where, I mean, you most likely this is going to end up being a draw, even though you have a queen and you have 2 whole extra pawns. But there really isn't a great way to break down these rooks. As long as these rooks stay together, and that's one of the things that I think that Rapport really does really good. And there's been other games that I've talked about that I've shown before, where if you are playing against the queen, you want to make sure that your pieces are coordinated. So as long as when you're playing 2 rooks against the queen, you can maintain the coordination between your rooks, it's like really hard for a queen to really do anything against both rooks that are coordinated. So that's why you've seen basically the rook living here, the rook living here, and the rooks like kind of being coordinated like this type of way. The move in this position to basically make sure that, you know, you don't drastically change the position and you keep, you know, your chances alive at least drawing the game is actually c4. So if you guess c4, congratulations. There's something that I mention sometimes when I'm doing the videos that, you know, there are some times where your opponent is trying to break open the position and it's best for you to keep it closed. And this is definitely one of those situations. You know, if you were to capture here, you'd be allowing black to try to break through the position. And it wouldn't be very good in this particular scenario. But unfortunately, after we see b4, Fabiano Caruana actually goes pawn takes b4. And this actually puts the white king in a mating net. As you guys already see, like the king is really stuck on this edge of the board. So we actually see rook takes b4. You got queen to d5, rook takes b3. And I mean, each player, they have only like a few seconds. I think Fabiano actually has like 3 or 4 seconds on his clock at this point. So I'm not sure if he was thinking that his king was like closer to this rook, or that somehow maybe he can like interpose his queen with a check or something like that. But he actually literally drops checkmate in 1. So he plays g6. And if it wasn't this exact position, g6 would actually be okay. But this actually allows Rapport to just place checkmate with rook to a3, and that's the end of the game. And everybody was just completely shocked. Like I watched both chess.com and I think it was St. Louis Chess Club broadcasts, and you know, everybody was just like, whoa, like what happened? And they were thinking, you know, John Ludwig Hammer was like, hey man, is this your analysis board? He's like, no, that's the board. It's crazy. So like I said, I mean, you know, when you get into time pressure, you know, you just make mistakes like this. This is definitely not something in a longer game that he would have done, obviously, because it's just mate. But I mean, with 0 time on your clock, you're like glancing back and forth on, you know, the board, and you're not looking at things correctly, and this sort of thing happens. So it is in this position that the players, you know, they didn't agree to anything. It is in this position that Fabiano Caruana does get checkmated. So that is the end of that game. And like I said, if you back up, I mean, there's not a lot extra that you can do. I mean, I was looking at the computer at this point, and it was giving queen to b7 as like +4. But like I said, I mean, as long as this rook stays anchored to this pawn, and this rook, these rooks just always stay together, there just really is never going to be a situation where you're able to force any type of mate. Like black has to just basically just completely blunder for you to be able to actually take, you know, control of the game. Even being up that many pawns, it's really hard. So that's a really crazy game. But I mean, I went ahead and said, hey, let me go ahead and show it real quick. I had a little bit of time. I do need to get in bed pretty soon. So that is all she wrote. But I appreciate you guys very much. For all of my people coming from the Philippines, I would say Makita tayo mamaya pa alam in kusanem to anybody who is coming from Hungary. And I'll see you guys next time.